This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your friend with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Can never help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up. You're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we get stuck in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Menang people. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content on Noongar country, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're all ready, let's flap and do this. Oh God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, I'm leaving it in. It's my podcast.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up the couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey, my darling labial ledgers, welcome back. Today I have a returning guest who I've had on before. I've got Cam Fraser, who I did an episode way back when I started the pod called Navigating Premature Ejaculation, Erectile Challenges, Masculinity, and Men's Sexuality. Oh my God, that's a mouthful. That was like that was when I was really brand new to coming up with episode titles. So forgive me for the keyword stuffing. But it was a great episode. So if you haven't listened to that one, go back. But just for some background on Cam, if you haven't heard that one or you're not aware, Cam is a certified professional sex coach and certified sexologist. Being a former tantric yoga teacher, his work integrates scientifically validated, medically accurate information about sexual health with sacred sexuality teachings from the mystery traditions. As a coach, he helps men go beyond surface-level sex and into full-bodied, self-expressed, pleasure-oriented sexual experiences free of anxiety or shame. Oof, yeah, get it. Great to have you back, Cam.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm excited to dive into today's topic as well.
Yes. So today we're going to have a chat about something that, like, I always stop and read about when you're getting on a soapbox about. I love your rants about this topic. And we're going to discuss how men's sexuality is over-pathologized and over-medicalized, and how this affects the way that we look at sexual function, the way men feel about their own sexuality and performance, and also like how this all came about, because we're in a bit of a clusterfuck at this point in time. Something that your work is really like trying to undo and trying to educate on. So it's hard to know where to kind of launch in with this topic, but I guess let's just start right at the beginning. Do you have a sense of like when the over-pathologization of this stuff all started? And I guess maybe it'd be awesome if you could just cover like what we mean by that as well, what we mean by the over-pathologization or over-medicalization of men's sexuality.
Sure, yeah. So they're somewhat related, the terms over-pathologization and over-medicalisation. The difference is that over-pathologizing something is essentially like considering normal variations in sexual function, if we're talking sexuality, related issues here. So normal variations in sexual function being considered dysfunctional. Right. So it's like we've got this range of things that we can expect in our normal everyday functioning of our sexuality. And that range has gotten smaller, narrower, and normal variations are now being considered dysfunctional or issues. They're being pathologized and so treated as like something that we need to fix. And then the over-medicalizing of sexuality or in what I speak about, male sexuality in particular, is those things that we've now pathologized, those normal variations in sexual functioning, are now being treated with medicine, right? With pharmaceuticals, with that, like the treatment of those things is a medicalized treatment. So that's what that means. And so the prefix over there is like, in my opinion, and in the opinion of other people who are kind of doing this work, where we've gone like way beyond what is necessary in terms of pathologizing certain sexual dysfunctions and certain sexual behaviors and certain things that the body does, and we've gone way too far into treating things with pharmaceuticals rather than taking a different approach. So that's like the broad strokes of those two terms. Where that started happening, I was having a think about this. I reckon we can probably, there wasn't like a one single thing that happened and it's like, okay, now we've kind of started on this route. But I think there was like in the like 19th century, so like the late 19th century, the like 1880s, 1890s, we had a bunch of Germans and Austrians writing books about sexuality. So you got like Richard von Krafft-Ebing, for example, wrote his book Psychopathia Sexualis, which was released in 1886. He was like one of the forefathers of modern day sexual medicine. This all comes out of Germany, Austria, and then we see that kind of going into like the 20th century. So the 1910s, 1920s. We see the studies around like sexuality being really academic and really scientific and really medical oriented. So like the field of sexual medicine kind of is birthed in Berlin in Germany in the 1910s and 20s. All those books, especially the ones related to like sexual diversity and intersex issues and like trans health, all that stuff that was still being researched at that time, all those books were burned by the Nazis in the 1930s. So we see like a lot of the research that had been done in those early days be destroyed. But like the transition was happening during that time of like, okay, we're going to study sexuality from like a scientific point of view, from a medical point of view. We're going to understand like, we see like similar things happening in the field of endocrinology and the looking at hormones. We see the same things in like neurology and stuff like that. So we're starting to see like the medicalized take on sexuality happening around that time. That's like, in my opinion, where it kind of starts to happen. Because prior to that, sexuality is really governed by religious authorities and spiritual teachers, and then even before that, we look like towards the East, right? Because this is kind of like happening in the West, and there's a really useful way of describing these two approaches. The way that we're approaching sexuality in the East, and now the way that it's being approached in the West. Michel Foucault has this idea of scientia sexualis, which is the scientific study of sexuality, which is like what I was saying was happening in Germany, and then he used this other term, ars erotica, which is like the erotic arts, which is what he saw. The way that they approach sexuality in China and in India and in Islamic countries as well, like the study of erotology, so the study of eroticism. So there's like this shift that we see in the West in particular, taking this medicalized route. So that's where I see it like starting. And then over time, like the 1960s, for example, we had Masters and Johnson. So they're like going deep into like understanding the response cycles of men and women and really like coming up with formulas, essentially. Like came up with like a formula, they were graphing sexual responses. So really taking this Western academic approach and like trying to understand this like formulaic approach to human sexuality. Then similarly in the 1960s, we had Viagra come out, right? So we'll probably talk about this in a minute, but like the medicalization part of it was something that people were really trying to do with regards to treating erection issues and treating premature ejaculation and stuff like that. Like what's the way that we can treat this with some medicine, but with the advancements in technology and medicine delivery, pharmaceutical delivery in the 1960s, that's when we really saw like a jump in people like being able to do that. So Viagra was released in 1990, but like all of that precursors to Viagra kind of started in the 60s when we started seeing like a lot of those injectables and shit like that. And I can talk a bit more into it, but like definitely it's jumped since the 60s in my opinion, like this trajectory of like really treating male sexuality in particular. I think there's a difference in my opinion between female sexuality and male sexuality, but like this idea that men are like machines. I think like there's culture that's embedded into this as well. Like male sexuality or the male body is like this thing that can malfunction, or is dysfunctional, and so we need to fix it by changing this part out, or and I think part of the reason why we have that approach to male sexuality is because there's this opinion or belief that like for men, sex is purely physical and that there's no emotions attached to it, and that like men aren't emotional and women are emotional. So for men, the quick fix or the easy fix is like the physical, like just, some part of their body's broken, so we've got to fix this part of them. So treating them like a kind of like a machine that's like I said, malfunctioning. So I think like the culture underneath it all, particularly here in the West, the way we think about masculinity is also influencing the way that we think about male sexuality, and also the way that we study it as well. Like I mentioned Masters and Johnson and their sexual response models, which came out in 1966. And since then, the female sexual response model that Masters and Johnson published has been critically revised about 9 times. And it's had these like really beautiful iterations where there's more nuance and complexity and more understanding and depth. And the male sexual response model has been revised once since then. So like there's this, at least in my opinion, like this reflection of the way that we think about female sexuality, which is like it's really complicated and it's like really nuanced and like multi-orgasmic. And then we've got this approach to male sexuality, which is like it's just linear, it's simple. We don't need to talk, well, we don't need to look at it too much because men just jerk off and they just ejaculate and like that's it. And so like the male sexual response model has no like it doesn't discuss multiple ejaculations for men. It doesn't talk about like multiple orgasms, doesn't talk about prostate orgasms, doesn't talk about any of these things. It's just like these are the 4 phases and that's it. So I went on a bit of a tangent there, but hopefully that like, gives you listeners and yourself like a bit of an understanding of it kind of started, 1880s, 1890s. And then we saw like the slow progression of that to become something where we're at today. And then advertising and shit like that is definitely a part of it today. But that's kind of a brief little history.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that, like any of that pretty much. I guess my field is so focused on female sexuality. And it's interesting because as you're talking, I'm reflecting on even just the language that we use around, it is kind of like men are this robotic thing that we're expecting to perform. And if they have performance issues, like, even just the word perform, like, oh God, horrible, so much pressure for starters. And then, that's kind of a phrase that you might use when you're, you're testing a prototype for like some bit of machinery, like, like what's the performance score and stuff like that. And, when I was doing some of my earlier, exploration in like neo-tantra and stuff like that, or sacred sexuality, there would often be, these workshops and they'd be like, yep, so like male tackle, super simple, super straightforward, pretty much same from man to man, do this, get that result. Whereas like for like feminine sexual energy and feminine body parts, like the arousal processes are so much more complex and and that was like a really standard like opinion or kind of like rule of thumb it was like women are complicated, men are simple. And I just think that that's so misleading and so damaging.
Yeah, and I think it's perpetuated by the way that we research sexuality, the way that we talk about it in media. And, there's like this interesting modality of sexological bodywork, right? Which is in my observation, it's like this intermingling of the Western academic kind of like scientific study of sexuality with the erotic approach, right? With that like artistic, erotic, sensual approach. And so I think we're like slowly seeing the integration of the two approaches, and so I am really interested to kind of like see where we go from here. But, what I'm saying isn't necessarily new. There's people that have been doing, she's a feminist critiquer of like Western scientific medicine. Her name's Leonore Tifa, and she's been talking about the over-pathologization and over-medicalisation of specifically male sexuality for probably the last 40 or 50 years. Like there's people that are talking about it and critiquing it, but it's like typically within the academic space. Leonore's a researcher, right? So she writes research papers, and so it doesn't really get much more outside of that. So it's like, in my opinion, important for us to disseminate that critique, and so that we're going like, hey, look, the way that we're talking about male sexuality is not helpful and not healthy. And when and I get so many clients that come to see to me like for erection issues, for example, or even premature ejaculation issues, and before they've seen me, they've already gone to a urologist for a prescription of Viagra or a prescription of SSRIs, which is what people are prescribing for premature ejaculation. They're prescribing low dose SSRIs, which is antidepressants, because the side effect of SSRIs is a low libido or an inhibited sensitivity. So like they're not prescribing it because the primary effect is that it helps with premature ejaculation like Viagra does, right, for erection issues. They're doing it because the side effect is so like I'm getting so many guys saying like, I've already tried this and it didn't work, or I've already tried, like their first port of call for dealing with like a sexual concern is the pharmaceuticals, right? And so and one of the reasons why I think that is because we've just been bombarded with advertising, bombarded with like all these sponsored posts and social media. There's so many like men's health apps which are talking about like the pharmaceutical, how easy it is to get pharmaceuticals. It's just like the first thing that pops into guys' head is like, oh, I've got to deal with this by getting some medication. And what I would like to see is that shift a little bit more. So rather than the first, decision that they make for managing their sexual concerns being like, I've got to go and get prescribed something, being like, all right, what's a more holistic way of dealing with this? Maybe I can do some breathing first. Maybe I can do some, anxiety releasing practices first. Like I'd love to see more of that come in, but you don't make money that way. You know what I mean? Like these big companies that are promoting pharmaceuticals don't have anything to gain from talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I know that the topic is men's sexuality, but like as you're talking, I'm just like, yes. I mean, it happens with everything, like over pathologization and medicalization of like periods, contraception, pregnancy and birth. Like it happens with female sexuality as well. It happens with freaking everything because like, the pharmaceutical company see a niche and see a way to make money and they just like put it in our heads that, our first port of call should just be like, take this quick fix, like have this pill. And it's the same with like the pill, like the contraceptive pill. Like so many people are taking that not for the primary, purpose of contraception, but for like skin issues or for, all these other things. And it's just like, oh my God. Yeah, it does my head in.
And I think they're like, it's important to clarify that there's a necessity of like having some sort of understanding of like sexual pathology that needs to be treated with, a medical approach, right? Like that's a necessity. So for example, people that have diabetes will often need to use Viagra because there's a specific type of blood flow issue that's going on. So like that's going to be helpful for them. But when that's, like I said, this is like the over-medicalisation, the over-pathologization is really a problem. It's like when that's, being used as every person who has erection issues, that's their approach is to take Viagra, then there's an issue, right? So like, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's like definitely circumstances and instances where that approach, that medicalized approach is necessary and is valuable and is very helpful. But when that's the only approach that we're taking and that's the first approach that people take, I think we're overdoing it.
Oh my God, totally. It should be like top of the food pyramid, sometimes food kind of situation where it's just like the last resort and it's in moderation and only as necessary, not just like default reach for that, that pill or that prescription. And that kind of leads into the next thing that I was going to say is that, there's valid arguments for like both sides. Like I think it can be helpful, it serves a purpose, and it could be validating as well for there to be medical labels and like quote unquote solutions to common sexual problems and challenges. But then also having those medical labels so normalized, having the solutions, the pharmaceutical solutions so normalized, like I feel like that's part of the problem, that it's now just so common to use terminology and identify with like labels like I have erectile dysfunction or like I have premature ejaculation and stuff. So I'm wondering, like, do you feel like it's like, when do you feel like it's helpful and more commonly I would say like harmful? Where what circumstances is it kind of like actually doing more damage than good to have all of these labels and these solutions that are readily available and normalized for men in particular?
Yeah, I've got a lot to say about this because Yeah, I'm just trying to gather my thoughts where I want to start. So I'll share from my own like personal observation with the clients that come and see me. So I get guys that come and see me and they say, yeah, I've got erectile dysfunction. I've got premature ejaculation. They'll self-label, self-identify as having these particular issues. Now, because of my studies, I'm well aware of the clinical criterion from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of like what it means to have erectile dysfunction as a clinical diagnosis, of what it means to have premature ejaculation as a clinical diagnosis. And 90+% of the men that come and see me do not have a clinical diagnosis of premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction. But that's the label that they're using, right? They're using the same language as a clinical diagnosis for their erection issues, right? Or for their experience of like coming before they want to, right? So I think because we don't talk about sex and sexuality publicly in a very constructive way, like there's still a lot of stigma and taboo about talking about sexuality and sexual concerns particularly, right? So I think the language is very narrowing and limiting in terms of the way that we understand like ourselves sexually. Like, so you've got guys identifying with clinical, diagnoses when they actually don't have it. And I think that's overdone, overdiagnosed. That then leads me into some thoughts around the way that we study the prevalence rates at a population level of erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation, because we ask men, right? Like we get men to self-report, right? No one's going around and sitting down with them over the course of several different sessions and like watching their penis, whether it gets hard or not in certain situations. We're giving them questionnaires and we're getting men to self-report. And so that is notoriously unreliable. If you look into like sex research and the reliability of self-reporting for both men and women, there's discrepancies, right? And so like that's important to take into consideration, is like we're unreliable when we report, right? And we tend to, especially because we've been fed this narrative that like, oh, if I get an erection one time, then I got erectile dysfunction. Like the anxiety that causes is then like going to be translated into your answers of that questionnaire. So like, for example, the questionnaire that is used to assess the prevalence rates of erectile dysfunction in at the population level is from the 1990s, from the late 1990s. It was created by the company Pfizer, who sells Viagra, which is an erectile dysfunction medication. So the questionnaire itself, which was originally 20 questions long and then got shortened to 5 questions long. So it's just asking, 5 questions to guys like, do you, how often do you get erections? Is it distressing to you? Like, it's very simple. And so my opinion, even though it's been like psychometrically validated, my opinion is that we're seeing higher prevalence rates of what is the actual number of men who have erection issues in the population because of the overdiagnosis that's happening from these questionnaires. Because guys are thinking, oh, I've got erectile dysfunction because I have, I struggle to get an erection a couple of times. And because that's what they've been told is erectile dysfunction, because of the shift in the over-pathologizing of normal variations in sexual functioning, we're getting higher prevalence rates at a population level, so it's over-reported. And I think Pfizer has a big, and not to be like real conspiratorial and anti-pharma, but like I think the advertising that Pfizer has done for Viagra medication over the last 30 years has contributed to that immensely. Because I get guys, like I said, who come and see me who struggle to get an erection one time, and now they think they've got erectile dysfunction. Like that, it just happened to me yesterday. I just had a guy yesterday, so that's why it's like right on the top of my mind. Is because he struggled to get an erection once, and now he thinks he's got erectile dysfunction. And so, so I think it's like really detrimental, that over labeling but it's reflective of the language. So I use that language because I know that's the language that men are using. So on my intake forms or whenever I'm talking about it, I'll ask men, do you think you have erectile dysfunction? They'll typically either say yes or no, depending on like what they share with me on the intake form. So I'll like begin by quote unquote colluding with them by using that same language. And then once they, have shared with me a little bit more and I kind of realize that they don't have erectile dysfunction in a clinical sense, I'll start to shift the language, and I'll just be explicit about it as well. I say like, hey, you actually don't have erectile dysfunction. You just have unreliable erections, or you don't have as erections as firm as you would like them to be. That's fine. We can do stuff about that, right? Like you don't need medication based on my observation of you. Same thing with premature ejaculation, right? If I talk about PE with a client, I'll start with him there, and then I'll shift the language to be like, look, man, you just come before you're ready. You just come before you and your partner want to. That's fine. We can do stuff about that. That's okay. You don't have a dysfunction. You're not broken and need fixing in that regard. So I don't know where I was going with this. I just wanted to share about that. I think I'll stop there. There's probably more I could say, but I'll stop there.
I had about 10 different things pop up that I was like wanting to I just feel like there's so much to say about this, and we could go on a million tangents. But something that kind of stood out is just like that all too common conflict of interest between like a pharmaceutical company and, you know, the research behind why their product is necessary and the marketing that they then do. Like, it's just so ridiculous that that's even allowed, and you know, that they're basically like creating more of a problem than there is, because, you know, a kind of variation in sexual function and erection and all of that is very, very normal and very okay. It's just that we've been made to feel like it's not okay and it's not normal. And I'm wondering, like, do you know much about, you know, say someone who has an issue with an erection like once or twice, then they fucking panic, and obviously then that creates more anxiety and potentially issues with their quote unquote performance and their erection in the future. And so obviously it's a vicious spiral, and then maybe they get some Viagra. If they're using Viagra like by default when they don't actually really need it because there's no medical reason to be using it, is that creating a dependence? Is that getting in the way of like them getting real, you know, natural erections in the future? Like, how does that impact them? Hey, Babe Towns. So sorry to interrupt, but I simply had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that you've got to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the potty to mingle in. And there you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies or discounts for offerings from guests who've been interviewed on the podcast, inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, and support from a community of labial legends. So head over to the links in the show notes and I'll hopefully see you in there. And now, back to the episode.
Yeah, it's not necessarily getting in the way of them getting erections, but a very common experience that I'll hear from guys is, as you shared, like they have psychological erection issues, right? Because they're anxious and they're tense in their body. And we know that you need to be relaxed and in your parasympathetic nervous system for that blood flow to get engorged. And so if they're not like, you know, relaxed and they're tense and they're worried about performance and the expectations about, you know, what sex is supposed to look like and things like that, then taking Viagra isn't going to help. And I hear this so often from guys, particularly younger guys who are like, you know, turning to Viagra because it's their first, you know, thing that they think that they need, is they'll say, look, I took Viagra, it didn't help. I still couldn't get an erection. And like, that is because they don't have a medical issue or a physiological issue. And so Viagra is working on a physiological level. It's not working on a mental level. It's not working on a anxiety reducing level. Now, I will stop myself there because there is an interesting placebo effect around Viagra, which I think is personally due to the amount of cultural stories behind Viagra, right? So like the little blue pill, right? It's like if you take the little blue pill, you're going to get an erection. It's going to be fine, right? Like it's your one pill quick fix solution to all your erection woes, right? Like that's the way Viagra's kind of been marketed. So there is this cultural story around, if I take this little blue pill, I will have an erection. So there is a placebo effect on anxiety, right? Which is interesting. And that's what I've noticed as well, is like because I'll get guys to like, you know, within their the information they've shared with me, I'll get them to half their Viagra dosage, for example. So I'll say, like, just, you know, halve your pill, cut your pill in half and take half of it, and they'll notice no differences whatsoever in their erection quality. Like it'll be exactly the same. And so the reason why I get them to do that is to have this light bulb moment of like, oh, I don't necessarily need this, and it's me that's having the impact on my erections, not the pill itself. Now, of course, Viagra does help with blood flow and things like that. Like there's a reason why it's prescribed in certain cases, like for diabetes, for example, because it's a for people that don't know the way that Viagra works as a mechanism, it's what's known as a PDE5 inhibitor. So PDE5, is the thing that breaks down nitric oxide in our body. So we need nitric oxide for our efficient blood flow, and that efficient blood flow is what goes into the penis and fills up the erectile tissue. Now, when PDE5 starts to break down nitric oxide, then the blood flow starts to flow out and we lose our erection. So what PDE5 inhibitors do is they stop PDE5 from breaking down nitric oxide, and so therefore you have more nitric oxide, more efficient blood flow, and more engorgement. That's the physiological mechanisms of Viagra. That's all it does. But like I said, if you're anxious and tense and you're not in your parasympathetic nervous system and you're not turned on and you're not aroused, then that's not going to help you, right? Because your blood flow isn't the issue. Your nitric oxide breakdown isn't the issue. It's the fact that you're overthinking or overanalyzing or stressed out or anxious about your quote unquote performance. So like that's what I want people to understand is like that's the mechanisms that it's working on. But again, because there's that cultural story, there's like this weird phenomenon of like, if I just take this blue pill, and I reckon, and there's been a little bit of research done into this of like Viagra placebos where they've just given people a little blue pill that's Viagra and a little blue pill that's just a little blue sugar pill. And they've seen people have increased erections from taking the little blue pill, sugar pill, because of the cultural stories that we have around Viagra. And so that's like an interesting little bit of sex research that I'm fascinated by. And so don't know where I was going with this. Forgotten what your original question was, but I'll see if I can bring it back around. I think there's a, no, I've lost it, Freya. Can you remind me what the original question was?
No, that's fine. Oh my God, I don't even know. I think I just made a comment and you flowed on from that. I don't even remember. But I think like, to tie a bow on that, it's what you're saying is like most issues or challenges with erections are actually not a physiological issue. And therefore, Viagra isn't going to be that helpful because so much of it is psychological, except when the placebo effect is actually working on the psychological, side of that. And like something that I feel like is a bit of a sidestep, but something I want to make sure we talk about because I love your stuff on this. But I feel like if we weren't so disparaging about soft dicks in the first place and so afraid of a flaccid penis and like what that means about us or what our partners will think that means about them and like how attractive they are or like whatever, we wouldn't be so desperate to try to fix this problem because we wouldn't see it as a problem in the first place, which like we really shouldn't see it as a problem in the first place. There's nothing wrong or abnormal with a flaccid penis. But, because there's so much pressure to have a rock hard dick and keep a rock hard dick and perform, like that adds in an intense like, cocktail of like anxiety and psychological hurdles about getting and keeping an erection. And so like, do you feel as though our attitude to soft penises is contributing to like feeling as though there's something wrong with us and therefore like needing help from something as powerful as like a pill to just like fix it and sort it out and then be more of a man?
Short answer to that question is yes, 100%. Something that I wanted to mention before I dive into like soft cocks, because I'm a big fan of talking about soft cocks, is like a lot of the Viagra efficacy research is done by Viagra. The Pfizer, the company that owns Viagra, so it's done by like Pfizer and its subsidiaries. So like that's also important to take into consideration when you're looking at Viagra research. And I also, I was speaking before about like the increased prevalence rates of like erection issues, for example, when you'll see headlines in the news or on like, online, magazine articles being like, there's like a 800% rise in like erection issues, like erectile dysfunction is like, there's this epidemic of erectile issues. And like, I think it's blown out of proportion, and oftentimes porn is usually blamed, and I think, and this is a bit of a side conversation, so I won't get too deep into it. But like whenever you see those, just remember that like the prevalence rate is self-reported. The questionnaire is by Pfizer, right? So there's like an investment in seeing those rises so they can sell more pharmaceuticals. And yeah, so it's just like, my opinion is that it's a fake epidemic of erection issues. Like, I don't actually think it's that high. And yes, I do think men probably think that they've got erection issues when really they don't, and they're turning to Viagra. And so one of the reasons why you'll see high prevalence rates is because some of that data comes from Viagra sales as well. So like erectile dysfunction medication sales. So like we're seeing heaps more sales happening because there's heaps more advertising being done. And so again, I think it's a skewed perception. And when I think that it's used for fear mongering, and then I think it's used to blame pornography. I'm just going to stop there. I just wanted to like mention that, just so we like cover small bases.
Totally.
But with regards to flaccidness, like I think we have a fear of flaccidness, right? In general, people don't know what to do with flaccid penises, and there's this symbology around erection and lack of erection, which is like, you're broken if you don't have an erect penis, right? Or if you don't get an erection straight away. And this is where we lead into like, there's a conversation to be had around unrealistic expectations of penises, right? Like a lot of people expect penises to act like dildos. And there's a sex researcher, which is a sex therapist, not necessarily a researcher. His name's Chris Donahue. He has this great article on Medium called "You Don't Have Erectile Dysfunction, You Have Erectile Disappointment." And I think I love that because it's hitting on this idea of broadening the language that we use to describe our experiences, sexually speaking. And also it starts to talk about like, getting an erection at the flick of a switch isn't really how erections work. You can move your finger up and down at your own beck and whim, but you can't do that with your cock. That's not how cocks work. And so to have this idea that you're supposed to get an erection immediately and that erections are supposed to stay hard all night long is also like, that's not how bodies work. That's not how erections work. And there's even warning labels on bottles of Viagra saying if you have an erection for more than a couple of hours, you've got to consult a doctor, right? Because it's not normal or natural to have an erect cock for a long period of time because the blood flow needs to move and the nervous system needs to have this interplay between the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches, which affects erectile strength. So like the normalization of natural fluctuations and variations in erection strength is really necessary as part of like our sex educating. But we have like, we're not getting that. So we have these unrealistic expectations that a cock is supposed to get hard immediately, stay hard for a long time, and there be no changes in that. So because that's like our default expectation, then when there's anything less than that, like a flaccid penis, for example, there's this story that comes up of like, something's wrong with me, I'm broken, or I'm not attracted to my partner, or I am not like aroused. And then, a lot of our partners have similar stories, like he doesn't like me, he's not turned on by me, he's not enjoying himself, he doesn't want to be here. And, part of that education is around arousal non-concordance, right? Which is like, you can be subjectively aroused, you can mentally turned on, desire to have sex and want to be there, but your body just hasn't caught up, right? And so you don't have an erection, or, the similar equivalent for women is like you don't feel lubricated, or you don't like have engorgement happening in the vulva, and vice versa. You can have an erection and you can have engorgement and you can have like the physiological signs of arousal, but not actually be turned on and not actually want to have sex and not actually be desiring to be intimate. And that's one of the it's one of the reasons why there's poor research around like male victims of sexual assault, for example, right? Because there's a line of thinking which is based on the misunderstanding of arousal non-concordance, right? Because we've conflated arousal with erection and vice versa, that if he was assaulted and he had an erection, then it means he must have enjoyed it and he must have been aroused by it and must have not been assault, right? And so that's where one of the myths of male sexuality, which is that men can't be raped, comes from. So like there's this like big misunderstanding of flaccid penises, there's a big fear around them. I often call it the fear of flaccidness. And on a less maybe intense level, there's kind of like a, what do I do with this? Like I get a lot of women ask me like, what do I do with this windsock in between my partner's legs? How do I touch it? Like, what do I do with it? Because, we never see that. Like a lot of people, the only education they're getting about how to touch other people's bodies comes from pornography. And, I'm not anti-porn by any means. I'm not pro-porn either. But like, I think it's really important to recognize that there's no flaccid cocks in porn, right?
Yeah.
So no one knows
Yeah.
what to do with a flaccid penis because there's no representation of it in a sensual, erotic, sexy kind of way. So we have this like this disconnect from doing anything with it, and so that's why I think I've done flaccid penis play workshops before, and just giving people ideas about how to like touch their partner's cock when it's not erect, and so. Yeah, so that was the long answer to your question. I know the short answer was yes, I do think that it's contributing. And the long answer is everything I just shared.
Oh yeah, hey, it's a podcast. We're not here for short answers. And I was gonna say, like, I absolutely loved. So I got Cam to do a penis play little masterclass for my online course, Queen Out, which is for people with vaginas, and it's a little bonus workshop for those that like to play with penises. And I loved that you included a section in there with like this flaccid silicone dildo that you had to do demonstrations of different strokes and moves and ways of interacting with a soft cock, because I hear that all the time as well. Like, women just do not know how to interact or engage with a soft penis. We also like really commonly attach meaning to it that isn't there. So we take it personally. They're not attracted to us. They're not as into this. We don't understand this arousal non-concordance piece commonly. And so like, both parties are probably kind of looking down at that windsock, as you called it. Love that. And attaching all of this meaning and making it mean more, making it personal when it really, really doesn't have to be. And that obviously puts more pressure on the situation and makes it more awkward or, charged. And it's really important to know. I think we also just think like, oh, like, what's a soft cock good for? It mustn't feel that pleasurable for the man. It's not going to feel that pleasurable for me because it can't penetrate, blah, blah, blah. But actually, like, you can do so much with soft cocks, and there's soft penetration. There is still pleasurable sensation for the penis owner to have it touched and stroked. And there's a lot of things you can do, but it's just not as common, not as normalized, not as well known about. So yeah, I think it's really important that you're kind of like getting that information out there. And I loved that you included that in Queen Out because, it's a common thing that I get asked, and people don't want to admit it or talk about it, but they're freaked out by a soft cock because they don't know what to do with it, and also because they're taking it personally and thinking it means something about something, that it just doesn't. So. Talk to me about, I just want to revisit, because you were sort of mentioning that, that Pfizer owns Viagra, and the questionnaire for like diagnosing, was it premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction, or was like 20 questions. Now it's like 5 questions. Okay. And it used to be, I know, a lot more difficult to get a diagnosis and get a prescription of something like Viagra. And it just feels like it's gotten easier and easier to the point where like literally the company that's making money off this is the one that's dictating who is eligible for it. And it's practically as good as an over-the-counter drug, right? So like surely it's just being used unnecessarily all the fucking time. Do you like to elaborate on that a little bit, because I did a bit of a broad strokes job of that. But yeah, Pfizer owns Viagra, and now all of a sudden we can get Viagra super easily.
Yeah, so Viagra is the patented brand name of the erectile dysfunction medication tadalafil, and that was, like I said, patented by Pfizer. So they came up with the formula for this PDE5 inhibitor, and they had a patent on it for, I believe, about 30 years. It couldn't be that long, about 20 years. And in 2021, that patent expired. So, and Pfizer tried, they put appeals in, they tried to get it patented for longer. And the reason why is so they could have a monopoly on the erectile dysfunction market, right? So they were the only ones that could sell tadalafil. There's sildenafil as well, and there's which is oftentimes under the name of Cialis, and then there's Levitra as well, which is another iteration. So there's slight tweaks to this original chemical compound. Someone will probably correct me on the way to pronounce those, or maybe I got the name switched up, I'm sure. But like that's the broad strokes kind of like understanding of yes, it was it was patented as a particular chemical compound for a certain amount of years. Pfizer tried to get it patented for longer so they could maintain that monopoly. But in 2021, that patent expired. And that's when we see a proliferation of, as you kind of mentioned, more quote unquote over the counter. They're not, and it's interesting because there's been restrictions lifted in some countries. So, for example, in the UK, it is over the counter now. You don't need a prescription for erectile dysfunction medication in the United Kingdom. You do still here in Australia, and I'll speak to that in just a second. And similarly in America, but it's different on a state by state basis depending on like where you are, because they do their own fucking thing over there. And so the patents run out, and then we see a proliferation of like off-brand or off-label versions of quote unquote Viagra or this PDE5 inhibitor. And in conjunction with that, COVID happened, right? And so the whole shift in the way that we receive prescriptions and medical advice goes online. And we see this massive increase in telehealth and telemedicine. So people are calling up their doctors, or more realistically, people are jumping on apps, on men's health apps, for example. And so I'll just name the apps. You can bleep these out if you don't want to have them in your podcast. But you've got Pilot, for example. You've got Mosh. You've got AMI. You have Mojo. There's a whole bunch of them, right? And they're kind of like, in the public perception, they're being lauded as good things because they're talking more about men's health, and like they're talking more about like sexual issues for men, and like, okay, sure, credit where credit's due. Yes, they're making those conversations more mainstream. However, what they're doing is they're making those conversations medicalized conversations, right? They're talking about, if you've got a sexual issue, here's a prescription for Viagra, right? So they make it much more easy to get a prescription because you just fill in a little questionnaire. Typically, you fill in a version of that 5-question questionnaire from, again, which was created by Pfizer as a way to, see if people should be prescribed. So there's like a vested interest in them over prescribing. And the reason why I know that it's very easy is because I did it. I just jumped on one of these apps. I won't say which one. I lied on the questionnaire, and I was able to get a prescription box of Viagra sent to my house. It wasn't Viagra. It was, the off-brands from their own pharmacy that they've partnered with, and get it sent directly to my door. So it's like become very, very easy for your like first port of call to be, I need medication for this. Now I can just jump on an app. I can lie on this questionnaire, or I can, over-report, which again is very much happening. A lot of people like over-reporting their instances of erection issues because they think that they have erectile dysfunction because that's the label that they've been given by the advertising that they've seen. Again, it's this like kind of pipeline. And so then they, a doctor, I had no consultation with a doctor. I had no one check in and be like, hey, are you sure? Like, do you need anything? And it was just like, yep, cool, signed off and sent to you. So it's become very easy now to be able to get erectile dysfunction medication. And like we're seeing similar things with regards to SSRIs for premature ejaculation, right? Like people are prescribing antidepressants at low doses to help with premature ejaculation. And that's also like, I reckon that's more of a concern than Viagra is. Because again, Viagra, all it really does is help with blood flow. So there's no, like there are some side effects, of course, with Viagra. Like I don't want to say that there's not. There's issues with sinuses and can sometimes have some issues on your vision and also on your heart if you're taking other medications like blood thinners. So like there are side effects, don't get me wrong. But I think there's probably more concerning side effects from SSRIs than there are from PDE5 inhibitors. So like that's an interesting area that I haven't seen too many people talk about. But yeah, so like that's been like a little bit of the history, right? It's like it prior to Viagra, we had the precursors, which were like injectables. This is a really interesting history, like sexual medicine history. There's like things that like, that you would have to put a needle into your dick with, right? Like that's how you would get your Viagra prior to Viagra existing, was like it was injectables. And so, fascinating history, and thank God we don't have to do that anymore for the people that need it, right? Like the oral treatment with regards to a pill is much more, much less invasive, I should say. So that's fantastic. But yeah, so it used to be very difficult to get something to treat, and then in the 1990s, so like 1993, Viagra was patented, and then 1998 it was released in the American market, and then since the first 3 years, they, and this is, in early 2000s currency, they spent over $300 million on advertising. And then since then, in the last 20 years, they spent several $billion on advertising for this erectile dysfunction medication. And it's gone from, you might recall some old Viagra commercials or Pfizer commercials, which are like typically old folks, they're like sitting on a beach somewhere, like hugging, or they're like on a yacht and, they're on a sailboat or whatever. And it's just like old people looking, happy and, obviously the implication being that they're having sex now because he's got an erection. But the way that the advertising has shifted now, and you can look at this, you can go back and look at, 20 years ago, the commercials that were being used to the commercials today and look at the ones in between. And the demographic has gotten younger and younger and younger and younger. And we're now seeing I've seen guys on social media ads that are younger than me, right? I turned 30 this year, and they're definitely, they at least look younger than me, but it's pretty clear that they're in their early to mid 20s. And like, that's a stark contrast for the way that we were advertising. Well, I say we were advertising, I wasn't doing shit, but the way that Pfizer was advertising erectile dysfunction medication 20 years ago, like the demographic has just shifted completely. So I think that has a lot to say about like again, I don't need to mean nefarious or like, conspiratorial, but like the marketing agenda, right? The profit-driven agenda is to get more people onto, Viagra prescriptions or, just to make money from it. And it's expected to over the next 5 to 10 years be like an $8.2 billion industry that just like sees exponential growth. And so that's been projected. So it's, it's a business strategy, right? It's like, it's a way to make money.
Oh my God, it's so scary. Yeah, it totally is. And you kind of already segued into my next topic, which was about like how the advertising is, kind of like changing the demographic that uses it, because it's normalizing just casual use of erectile medications for like a lot younger people. And some of the ads that I've seen you repost about erectile dysfunction meds, like pretty outrageous. Like, I mean, clever, so clever. These are like marketing strategists, like geniuses. Like, they've probably got psychologists involved. Like, these big companies, like, they know what's up. They know how to fucking make us feel like we need something, and also just like make it very normalized in the mainstream. So, do you want to like elaborate a bit on some of the like more recent marketing campaigns and how that actually makes men feel?
Yeah, the biggest change has been like where the marketing is taking place, right? Because these are ads on social media. Everything that I've shared, that you are referring to, has been stuff that I've screen recorded from sponsored posts that I've seen on my Instagram feed. Like, because I click on them, I'm there like, doing like some counter insurgency kind of research, on these ads. So I click on them when I can, so I get them to pop up more often, because I see some really like, okay, I have a bias here as well, because like it fucking pisses me off that they're allowed to put ads up and I'm not, right? So like that shits me to tears. Is that like me and other sexuality educators get shit canned by these social media platforms, and then we've got like these big pharmaceutical companies and like apps that have a lot of money to spend, like getting heaps of airtime. So that's just one thing that I just want to say. Like, I definitely have a bias there that I'm annoyed about. But yeah, so like that's the biggest change that I've noticed, is like the shift of where these ads are taking place. So we know that people that are on social media, it's a younger demographic, of course. And then you're right, the way that they create these ads, like they're very catchy and they're very like, young person oriented, or like, mid-20s millennial kind of oriented. And so I think that's like a key metric, let's say, that has changed, a key measurement to be mindful of. And then, the language has kind of shifted as well into much more of a like recreational use as opposed to clinical use, right? Like a lot of the early Pfizer advertising for Viagra was like, if you've got these conditions, like if you're aging and if you have diabetes or if you have these medical issues, like this is going to be helpful for you. And that isn't really talked about anymore in a lot of these ads. It's more like, hey, like if you want to have better sex, if you want to like connect more with your partner, is your relationship struggling, like it's the medical language has been taken out of it, and it's much more of like a recreational bent to it as well now.
Yes, but still a medical solution.
And I don't. Yeah, totally. It's still a pharmaceutical intervention. And, I don't want to bad talk my colleagues, but like something that I think is contributing to this is, and I mentioned it before, and I just want to circle back around to it, is like we're blaming porn as like the only issue. Like that's the only reason why guys are having erection issues, right? They've got porn-induced erectile dysfunction, and there's like a bunch of articles and like I said, my colleagues like talking about like how porn is the reason why men have these erection issues. And again, that's overblown. Like, yes, there's some contributing factor there. And if guys are like, really psychologically being aroused by a specific thing from pornography that's not happening in their real life, and they've conditioned themselves to this particular stimulus, yes, it's going to have an impact. But there's so much other things going on with regards to like the increased prevalence rates of erection issues. So like to just ignore all that and just lay the feet solely at lay the blame solely at the feet of porn is like not helping, at least in my opinion. So like I try to, that's why I speak about it, because I don't see a lot of my colleagues like really going into that side of things and recognizing a lot of those other, all of the nuance to it. So yeah, just want to like, I don't know, like I don't want to mention names, but I've seen some of my colleagues do that, and I'm not like, I just wish they would like do a little bit more research into the cultural aspects of erectile issues.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, porn definitely has an impact, a negative impact, but I think it's so much more nuanced, and there's like many different sources for the challenges nowadays. Do you want to like do a bit of a sweep of like some of the other ones that aren't getting as much attention or airtime that are actually really like contributing to challenges with men's sexual function?
Yeah, I mean, in my observation with the clients that I'm working with, it's anxiety induced, right? Like, and we can label that as performance anxiety, but that's psychological. But there's like there isn't a one size fits all erectile dysfunction. So there's psychological, but there's also like physiological as well. There could be some physiological issues which could be contributing to it. So like, for example, if you've got tension in your lower back, or if you've got like hypertonic pelvic floor, things like that. But then there's also it could be an injury that you've sustained. A lot of like professional bike riders, for example, or people that just like do a lot of bike riding often have erection issues because of the pressure that's placed onto the perineum and the bruising that happens there and like the tension that's built up. Then there's like there's vascular erectile dysfunction. So there's issues with blood flow and constriction of the blood vessels, or, there's neurological issues. So it's like neurological ED, which is related to, the firing of the nervous system, particularly the parasympathetic branch, because that's what we need for engorgement, and the pinching of the pinching of the, what are they called? The veins, right? For the blood to flow out. Like that's a nervous system response. So like the nerves need to be firing correctly for those things to be closed down so you can keep the blood there. There's iatrogenic ED, which is like medication induced erectile dysfunction. So people that are taking too much SSRIs, for example, one of their side effects is that they're having erection issues. So there could be other medications that they're taking. So blood thinning medications, for example, might be making the blood like not pool enough in the cock, and so like the erection is not maintainable. So there's like a bunch of reasons why, but I personally believe that the main reason is what we've kind of covered here. Like it's the anxiety from the expectation and the pressure put on a penis, and it needing to be hard immediately and stay hard for a long time. That coupled with the fear of, if I don't have a hard cock, what is that going to mean? What's the the unspoken symbolism? It's the phallocentric approach that we have to sex, which is like sex can only happen when there's a hard cock involved. And so Diversifying our sexual experiences is a really important part of that. There's the expectations that come from pornography, like that. When's the last time you saw a flaccid penis in porn? They're always hard all the time. They have no issues getting hard. What you don't see behind the scenes is a lot of those guys are using pharmaceuticals. I talked about injectables before. There's a long history of penile injectables in professional pornography as well, because if you're shooting for 8 hours a day, you've got to make sure you can get hard, right? And make sure that you can literally perform, because it is a performance, right? In pornography. So there's a lot of erectile enhancement pharmaceuticals being used in the pornography industry, which isn't really talked about by mainstream folks. Just all these and then the self-diagnosing. So I think there's a lot of things happening where psychologically it's anxiety that's causing and unrealistic expectations that's causing the erection issues. When so when we talk about erections, I think that's where we should be focusing our attention, not necessarily on the medicalized version. I mean, those are important conversations, but I think generally speaking, it's the psychological side of things that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, so much of the time there isn't actually a necessity for a medical or a pharmaceutical solution. It could actually just be solved by some specialized therapy and some education or practices, or even just ideally a whole cultural attitude shift and a rebranding of soft penises and male sexuality. There's so many other things that really should be being addressed from a holistic standpoint, rather than, throwing medication at it. But that's pretty fucking common these days, isn't it? So great that you're at least doing that work and working, with men through your business as well, to just really help them avoid needing to take medication or reaching for that as a first, solution. Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers, or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion, though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also have a Sunroom profile over on the Sunroom app, as I've mentioned. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps, because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. And I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later. Do we have time? Do you have a TMI story? Because I do want to get a little segment in. We didn't do Get Pregnant and Die, because we did that in our first episode together. But before we wrap up and I ask you for your final thoughts on this topic, can we just shuffle over to the TMI segment real quick?
TMI, we love it. TMI, we love it.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to do it.
And I'm putting you on the spot, but is there any, story that springs to mind? Doesn't have to be related to what we're talking about at the moment, but yeah, a story that's a bit TMI that might be, interesting or helpful for people to hear about.
And I can tie this into what we've been talking about, which is a incident where I personally injured my penis, and that resulted in some erection difficulties. And so the injury that I sustained was from penetrative sex, and it was it's going to sound horrible, so listeners, if you're squeamish, so I tore the skin of my frenulum. For those of you that don't know, the frenulum is it's horrible, right? I still get a little bit sick in my stomach thinking about it. But the The frenulum is the piece of skin. So I'm uncircumcised, and the piece of skin that goes on the underside of the head of the penis that kind of connects the foreskin when it's retracted to the head of the penis, like the upside down V-shaped area on the underside of the head of the penis. So that piece is the banjo string. Yeah, there we go. For those of you who are interested in the colloquialism, and it's relatively like fragile. It's like just like the banjo string is what sums it up. Like it's quite thin, and so having some pretty vigorous, vigorous penetrative sex and in a certain position, and it was and so just it tore. So there was like a lot of blood, surprisingly a lot. Well, not surprisingly, I suppose, because if you've got an erection, there's a lot of blood there, and so there was going to be a lot of blood that came out, even though it was quite a small tear. But that, like, the reason why I share this is because then through the healing process, like, getting an erection was painful, right, for a certain amount of time. And so that physiology, like my body held on to that trauma, held on to that information, right, of like, getting an erection for the next couple of weeks, like that was a painful experience. So then when I went back to, like, when I was fully healed and there was no pain physically, there was still this like little psychological association of like, getting an erection is going to hurt me. And so there was a period of time where I was like learning a little bit, like how to be comfortable getting erection, how to like be gentle with my cock again, how to like, welcome it back essentially after being, in rehab, like a muscle, like you hurt your muscle. You don't go straight back into smashing your favorite, workout. You ease yourself back in. Right. So that was, an experience that I had, which I had to do right with my partner. And so, so I share that because like there's, and you might not have an injury that's like that extreme, but you might have an experience that's really negative and causes like some either physical pain or like psychologically makes you feel really shit. And then the next time there's an association there, right? So that may contribute to some erection issues, or it may contribute to like your lack of like wanting to be in that space in that moment, or like the desire that you feel. And so it might require a little bit of nurturing, or it might require a little bit of like welcoming your body back in, of being slow, of touching, of being just giving yourself permission, right, and the grace to learn about your body and to be sensual with it, and to give it the time to get aroused and to feel good about the sensations that you're experiencing. So that's, and I've shared that probably on a couple of other podcasts. You're probably like one of 3 that I've shared that story. So it's out there. I don't feel embarrassed about sharing it because I've shared it before, but it's related, I suppose, to this.
Totally. Yeah, and it's sort of like a perfect example of what I was trying to describe earlier, how like, often these challenges with erection that have now manifested in this sort of vicious cycle that keeps repeating, like they might have come about from a physical injury or a sort of, an actual tangible thing that happened that has then kind of gotten us into this headspace of like fear and anxiety that then perpetuates itself and presents as like an ongoing problem. But that doesn't mean like we need to do it, have like a drug for that. That means like we really need to excavate and go back to like figuring out what the root cause is and uncovering some layers. And like I've had, spoken to so many clients who might be struggling with an issue that now is very pathologized, and they're being offered these medical solutions. Like something that comes to mind for females is like vaginismus. There's really contraction, lots of painful sex, pain during penetration and stuff. And usually that's come about from something that is no longer actually physically an issue, but the body is responding in this like physical way to like a psychological, fear and anxiety around that area of the body, or around penetration, or around trusting someone to like let them in. And I imagine it's very similar with like erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation. Like maybe the initial thing that kick-started it and made it a challenge for like a short period of time has now disappeared and is no longer an issue, but the psychological, self-perpetuating, like the self-fulfilling prophecy of that, and the anxiety that comes with this expectation that like this is we're not gonna be able to get an erection, or it's gonna go away, or like, oh, what's gonna happen, is actually now the thing creating the problem. So like, yeah, finding the root cause, super important, and like approaching it very compassionately and gently and with a lot of like nuance and understanding of how complex and sensitive our bodies are. You know, they're not machines to just like perform on cue.
Yeah. And that, brings me back to Chris Donahue's article. You don't have erectile dysfunction, you have erectile disappointment, right? Like there's so much value in it's like unpacking your expectations about what your body should or shouldn't do, and stop putting yourself in a box, with regards to your sexual experiences. Like there's, that's like a lot of the work that I do is just giving men the permission to explore themselves and to not, have such rigid expectations about their body. And then when they do that, they start to have more pleasurable, more fun experiences, both alone and with their partner. And because they're being more present and having more fun and experiencing more pleasure, the sexual dysfunction issues that they had go away because they're not anxious about their sex anymore. It's fun and enjoyable for them. And so they're able to relax into it. And the erection issues don't manifest because they're not, stressed out.
Totally. Yeah. All right. Amazing conversation. I could chat with you forever about this stuff. And if people are curious to know more, Cam goes into so much detail in his content, his podcast, blog, Instagram, TikTok, all of it. You're a content machine. So I'd highly recommend people go and follow him. I'll put Cam's details in the show notes. Thank you so much, Cam. I've loved this chat.
Yeah, no worries at all. I can share with you a link. I used to have a YouTube account, but it's been deleted again.
God.
The other big pharma companies haven't. That's my little gripe. But I've got a video. It's on the platform Vimeo, and it's like a 40-minute long video about. It's a deep dive into the way that erectile dysfunction is portrayed in mainstream media. And so if your listeners like this conversation, they're going to like that video because it's like unpacking the way that we portray it and represent it. And, it's oftentimes framed as like a big joke, and male sexual dysfunction is funny and it's played for comedic effects. And, Viagra is valorized in a lot of these representations in mainstream media. So all these movies and TV shows that you've seen. I'll send it to you, Freya, and you can put it in the show notes for people that are interested in going on a bit of a deeper dive into the mainstream media that's contributed to this.
Oh, fuck yeah. Yeah, amazing. That's perfect. Thank you. I'll definitely grab that off you. Beautiful. All right. That is a wrap for today. Thanks, Cam.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Excuse the interruption, my loves, but I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab. And the more people who get to hear it, the more people it can help. Reviews and ratings help me curry favour with the algorithmic gods and get suggested to other listeners to check out. Plus, they make me feel really good and appreciated as I continue to pour my heart and soul into creating this baby for you. And I promise I don't mazz over them or anything. I mostly just tuck them away for a rainy day when I'm filled with self-doubt and existential dread about being self-employed, which is fairly frequently. So you see, leaving a review really does make a difference, and it's an easy little act of support that you can take in just a minute or two by either going to Spotify and leaving 5 stars for the show, or writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Choose your poison, or if you're a real overachiever, you could do both. Whoa now. If you are writing a review though, just be sure to only use G-rated words because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't actually show up. Lame. Anyway, oh, what was that? Oh, you're going to go do it right now while I wait. Okay. Yeah. No, that's a great idea. May as well just quickly click that 5-star button before we get on with it and, forget about it and get on with your day. I'm hearing them roll in. I'm hearing those 5 stars. Oh my God, I make myself cringe. Anyway, thank you muchly. You're a total gem. And that's it, darling hearts. Thank you for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. And in the meantime, if you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that, my dear, is a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism. And you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. Also, I'm always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, or guest suggestions. So feel free to get in touch via my website at freyagraph.com or say hey over on Insta. My handle is Freya_graph_YMT, and I seriously hope you're following me on there, because damn, we have fun. We have fun. Anyway, later labial legends. I'll see you next time.